Greetings and a warm welcome from me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today, in the latest of my deep dive videos, I'm going to explore the retrograde of the planet of talk and thought, Mercury, the winged messenger. And this is going retrograde through the sign of Capricorn, a serious, authoritative and earthy sign, from the 13th of December for 10 days through to the 23rd. Now, we all know that Mercury retrogrades can cause some glitches and issues, but what will this particular Mercury retrograde be like? And the best way to understand this is to see exactly what's going on when the event begins. So at 7:09 a.m. Universal Time on the 13th, we take a snapshot, and that gives us the event chart, and we can look at that in terms of Placidus, which actually has a Sagittarius ascendant, one that is conjunct Mars. So that's very, very exciting when we're thinking about the cautious energies of Mercury in Capricorn. But also we can look at it from a solar chart perspective where we can all relate to this event, and that puts Mercury in the 10th house in Capricorn, very much to do with our worldly interactions, business and so forth. So I'm going to share all that with you, and also some of the archetypes of Mercury, but then I'm going to go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces to give you a flavour of what you can expect in terms of your sun or your ascendant. Now, we're nearly there, 2024. If you would like to understand what the year holds for you based on your personal birth information, if you give me your time, date and place of birth, or date and place, if that's all you know, I can prepare for you your transits for next year. But also in my special package, you'll get 30% off and get your life roadmap report, your character analysis, which will give you searing insights of how the patterns in your life have played out so far and how you can work with them more effectively future forwards. But in that special package, you can also get completely free your year 2024 zodiac forecast, Chinese forecast and Indian forecast for all 12 signs. Please see the link below for more. Okay, so Mercury retrograde begins at 7:09 a.m. on the 13th of December and at 8 degrees and 29 minutes. But of course, Mercury started to slow down first of all in its pre-retrograde shadow on the 25th of November in the sign of Sagittarius, which precedes the sign of Capricorn. But let's just have a little bit of a talk about Mercury and Capricorn. Capricorn is a very serious sign, although people who are Capricornian subjects, as they seem to get older, seem to become more playful and usually have a great sense of humour. But Mercury here is brilliant for really grappling with the details of things that gives us some kind of tangible outcome that's substantive, because the sign of Capricorn, the 10th of the zodiac, is known as the sign of culmination in the physical realm. The sign of Pisces is the sign of culmination in the more spiritual dimension, I feel, because Capricorn is about structures. That's what its ruler Saturn really asks us to respect. Sometimes those structures and institutions are things that we may find frustrating, whether it's big national government, local government, organisations that we interact with, could be the institution that we work for, particularly if you do work for a big organisation. But even if you work for a smaller one, or even yourself, Mercury in Capricorn is a very business-like place for this planet to be. So because it is about the expression of ideas, people with Mercury in Capricorn natally tend to be interested in business. And even if they're not actually in business for themselves, can have a very business-like approach to situations, whether it's marshalling those resources like property or possessions in a very astute and shrewd way. Now, people who are or do have Mercury in Capricorn can be quite concise in the way they say things, so can cut to the chase. But it's because there's a kind of impatience with the floweriness that can go on these days. It's wanting to deal with what's tangible and real. But it is, of course, an authoritative sign. So people with Mercury in Capricorn may actually be in a position in life where people go to them for advice or knowledge or guidance, such as a business advisor, a banker, an accountant, those kind of things. Now we know the sign of Scorpio is also very strong around those things, but Mercury and Capricorn itself are very much to do with trying to use wisdom and shrewdness to make the best decisions, and they're not always the most flamboyant way of approaching things, but certainly a lot of the way that Mercury works in Capricorn comes from experience, and that experience provides an insight, and that's something that we should have respect for. But I think it's inevitable that some big businesses through this next 10 days may have some problems with their technology, because that's what Mercury rules, particularly through the sign of Gemini, but also the precision that comes through the sign of Virgo. If something needs to be managed, we're getting to the end of the year and people's energy may be a little lower. We've also had, a lot of things going on in the world this year that, has been hard to process at times. The news cycle is not always easy to digest. So Mercury going into its retrograde in Capricorn could see some issues with those technological systems, but maybe also we're going to see some greater scrutiny of the way that government or institutions work. So how much information they share. Do they share that in a fully transparent way? Are they inclusive? Or is it on a just to know basis? And it may be that people are going to actually press those big institutions to clarify things. But particularly I feel in terms of taking responsibility. So, we have in many arenas around the world decisions that are made by people, but are they always held to account? So I think we are going to see some people who've had a lot of power being held more to account. So there's going to be more scrutiny. So the Mercury retrograde could work well in that regard. But clearly, if we're going for a job, trying to promote our business, doing a presentation, the potential for things to just go awry is definitely ramped up. But there's also the potential to revise, revisit and reset things that maybe haven't been working quite as well. And because the world's changing at such a rapid pace, as we all go into year 2024 and the return of Pluto to Aquarius for 38 weeks from the 21st of January, the new technologies that are coming in, obviously AI, robotics, automation, is something that we're all very, very aware of, and that can have an impact on the way we've traditionally gone about things. And the sign of Capricorn is traditional right down to its boot laces. So I feel that Mercury retrograde here gives us all a chance to think, how can we work with things but also maintain a semblance of security? And one of the best ways to do that perhaps could be to use technology in a shrewder way, or perhaps to learn new skills. And Mercury in Capricorn can often be an excellent time to apply for a course, do some kind of upgrade to our knowledge, which then helps us to function more effectively in terms of our connection to the world, because Capricorn is our connection to the world in an overall context for us all. So that gives you a little bit of a flavour of where I feel the glitches may occur. Once Mercury inverts back into Sagittarius, I feel the last week of this year, it's nailed on that there's going to be problems with long distance travel and anything to do with international affairs, because Sagittarius governs borders and boundaries and the movement of people, particularly through long distance travel. It's just obvious that there's going to be some glitches with that. But in this particular 10-day period, I feel that we're all needing to sort of make sure we're finding the balance between how we think, how it's been, the established order, very Capricorn, but how we're evolving and dealing with the changes through technology that we're all faced with. And that's how I see this playing out. Now, we do have some very impressive aspects, not just on the event chart, which I'll share shortly, but also in terms of what we can expect. So on the 18th of December, we're going to have a beautiful trine between Mercury and Jupiter. And the interesting thing, of course, is that they're both in retrograde. As this event occurs, they're in touch, they're within 3 degrees, but that's a perfect alliance. And Mercury and Jupiter, Mercury commerce, Jupiter trade, so there can still be good news. And also there is a really positive link between Mercury and Venus, which became exact on the 11th of December, but it's still going on to the 14th within 3 degrees, so that's really nice. Then on the 21st, Mercury forges a fantastic sextile with Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn. How good is that? And then on the winter solstice, on the 22nd, we have a Mercury cazimi. This is an inferior conjunction, which means because of the retrograde, Mercury is passing in between the sun and the moon. And what that does, the warmth of the sun, even in the rather cool, steady eddy Capricorn, magnifies through its radiance the brilliance of Mercury. So it's possible, despite the retrograde, there'll be some marvellous ideas, dialogue and conversations going on. So it's absolutely vital that we don't see the Mercury retrograde as purely a negative thing. So that brings us to the event chart. So on the screen now, I'm showing the natal event chart, the ascendant, Sagittarius, 10 degrees and 8 minutes, conjunct Mars, which is a very exciting vibe. But that's a pretty impatient vibe too. But you can see the sun is also in the first house. And you can also see, so is the moon, because we've just had the Sagittarius new moon and the moon's moved on. But the midpoint between the two of them is 23 degrees in Sagittarius. But the critical thing is they're squaring Neptune, but that's in the third house, very Gemini-like, ruled by Mercury. And of course, Neptune can create distortion, misunderstandings. So we can rush things through that Mars ascendant in Sagittarius that's impatient to crack on. But I think what we're being cautioned there is not to be too hasty. And that's where that glorious Capricornian energy comes in. Slow things down, assess all the options, be very businesslike, take some time out to assess things, invest wisdom and shrewdness in whatever we're considering. So even if we feel a push to get on with things, important that we resist that somewhat. But you can also see that Mercury's in the first house as well. Now I mentioned that Mercury is going to come back into that glorious trine with Jupiter on the 18th, but very, very close, 8 degrees 29 and Jupiter 6 degrees and 7. So fabulous trine. And Jupiter's in the 5th house, which, you know, at this time of year, we want to have some sociability, interaction and playfulness. So that's glorious. But also Mercury's forging a lovely link with Venus. So Venus in the 11th house, itself very sociable, but in the sign of Scorpio, it's asking us to perhaps meet up with the people that we feel most invested in, most our most long-standing alliances. But it's also possible that there could be a spark of romantic magic for some people in the run-up to Christmas, and some interesting clinches under the mistletoe. So that gives you a flavour of Mercury in the first house is very much about innovation. It's about getting things off the ground. It's not about hanging around, because Jupiter is egging it on. So we can see straight away by diving deep into this wheel, it's not all bad news with Mercury retrograde, especially with Venus really bringing an added dimension of charm and desirability to the equation. Now on the screen now I'm sharing the event chart from a solar perspective, and there we are. We've got that big load of planetary activity in house 9, Sagittarius, but there's Mercury in the 10th house in Capricorn. So the relationships are the same. Mercury still has a lovely link to Jupiter and to Venus, but they're in their more naturally aligned houses. So Mercury is very businesslike in house 10. Jupiter is thinking about the money in house 2 and our sense of self-worth and values, but also perhaps food. The second house Venusian energy, it's all about enjoying ourselves and particularly indulging those calorific goodies at this time of year. But because Venus and Jupiter are in an opposition, it wouldn't be a surprise if we did encounter someone through our work that we felt a big attraction to, whether we're involved or not, or some good news came through work, some bonhomie was shared just in the run-up to Christmas. I think the big thing to take out of all of this is the fact that Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn, is in the sign of total culmination, Pisces. And that's a very much more spiritual and emotional placement for Saturn. And Saturn can obviously be a bit cool, so it's asking us all to work harder at how we feel about things. But Mercury retrograde, for sure. You know, there's going to be some tangles, it's inevitable. Some things that we'd normally rely upon that are steadfastly dependable, whether it's a person, an organisation, something like a vehicle, because obviously Mercury does govern short journeys at least, or our communication with perhaps siblings or neighbours because of that Gemini energy. Maybe things can go a little awry because someone could resist a person taking an assumed role of leadership. And obviously these kind of politics are not unusual at this time of year, but I don't think it's too late in the year in terms of the business cycle to see some quite major disruption, and the chances are it could be around systems, but equally it could just be around how big institutions like governments communicate or not, or we're going to see people who have held roles being held much more accountable and being scrutinised and their feet held to the flame in a way that a lot of these very influential people seem to avoid. I think there's much more chance of that happening with Mercury in Capricorn. So we have to see it not just as something that plays out in our own personal world of things going awry. It could be that there's some upside from this, from the old-fashioned, more traditional benefits of Capricorn, of, you know, being decent, being reliable, being respectful, and expecting people to withhold some basic civil standards. I think that's going to be a theme that plays out over the next 10 days. Please stay with me as I go through each of the 12 signs from Aries through to Pisces. So Aries, for you, I've been saying to you for some while that with Saturn having joined your 12th house in March, along with Neptune, which had been there for a long time, some of the strands that have been very important to your world for a long time could really be fizzling out. And one of these could be to do with your work. So I feel that Mercury retrograde is really going to sharpen up your thinking and focus your mind on any situation where you don't feel particularly at ease or invested. You don't feel that there's a particular nurture within the organisation you work for or work with, and that can see you thinking very carefully about what your options are. But it's possible too that your business opportunities could be linked to overseas connections or travel, and that's going to be flagged up very strongly between now and the end of the year. But if you are in a role where you feel that there's a lot of expectation but not necessarily a lot of acknowledgement or appreciation from your ultimate line managers, that could be something that sticks in your craw over the next 10 days. Now Taurus, for you, Mercury retrograde could well be linked to travel, documentation, a contractual matter, all 9th house stuff. But of course the 9th house has been an area of huge growth for you since 2008 because of Pluto, and also Uranus in your sign for the last 4 3/4 years has been pushing you to be that much more provocative and challenging in your approach to situations. And the ninth house is about higher truth. So even though the host is the stodgy old Capricorn, for you there's more zing, there's more of a Sagittarius feel. So if you work in a business situation where you feel that there is not a particular amount of freedom for you to flex and demonstrate your individual talents, it just feels all, very much you have to fit into a particular role in a particular way, and it's not very stimulating. Even though in the past security has meant a lot to you, you may find yourself over the next 10 days thinking, do you know, I could do some different things, and I need to do some research, I need to check out some different opportunities. So you actually can find this Mercury retrograde pretty exciting. But if you are jetting off somewhere or heading off for some kind of break from now through to the 23rd, is there an increased potential for things to go awry? Frankly, yes. All we can do with Mercury retrograde is make sure that the things that we can control, we prepare as well as we can. So, I'm heading off on a journey tomorrow. The tyres are being pumped up. I've learnt to put oil in my car for the first time, and water. I'm not very good with cars, and I've even washed it, which is absolutely unbelievable. So I'm doing some prep, but I still can't control the fact that someone may drive erratically in front of me, or there could be some roadworks going on, all the things that Mercury retrograde can throw up. But all I can do is make sure that my side of the bargain is really nailed down, and that's the same for you. So Gemini, this is going to be a really interesting 10 days for your sign in particular, because especially if your sun is nearer to the end of the sign of Gemini, the last couple of years you've been afflicted by Pluto in a quincunx. If you're more at the beginning of Gemini, you've been liberated from Pluto's more telling application, and you're actually going to benefit from it hugely as it moves into the sign of Aquarius on the 21st of January. But if there has been some kind of transition in terms of your work or how you earn money, possibly even more since Saturn moved into the sign of Pisces on the 7th of March. So if you have found that an old income stream has been a little more precarious, this next 10 days can be a time for you to do a lot of talking, a lot of discussing, a lot of thinking. But remember, that's what you're great at, thinking, but then communicating. But it's the 8th house for you, and that's where we're most invested, or we want to separate because something's coming to an end. So whatever is going on in your situation where you feel a sense of dissatisfaction, so it could be with your bank, the 8th house. You're fed up with them. They're closing branches. They're changing the terms and conditions of your account. They're not giving you the same rate of return on your savings. That kind of deep relationship, even if you've been with them for years, you may decide, I'm going somewhere else, because you're going to use your longer term resources or your shared resources or your business approach. You're going to use the energy that you've learned from Pluto over the last 15 years to apply your mental agility and precision to being canny about how you can make the most of things. But there could be some crosswires in a business situation, and if you are trying to raise finance for an enterprise, or you have to work with an investor, it might not all work out exactly as you expect. But just be aware that Mercury will return to your sector of relating on the 23rd of December, where it's going to be through to the 2nd of January. So maybe there's a bit more discussion to understand what the dynamics will be in the relationship. But the 8th house can also be sex and intimacy. Now, talking about those things is very different from actually doing those things. Is that something that Mercury retrograde is going to get you thinking about or doing about? That's interesting, Gemini. So Cancer, for you, Mercury retrograde in your 7th house, straightforward, it's about relationships. but it doesn't have to be romantic relationships. And you could be revisiting how you interact with all sorts of people, resetting your stance. The seventh house is where we put our boundaries, but it's also where we meet opposition and connect with people. And, I feel that this Mercury retrograde does give you enormous opportunities, particularly the Cazimi on the 22nd. So maybe the way people perceive the way you communicate is very different from how you see it, because your relationship to the planet Mercury can sometimes be a bit subjective, because Mercury is about a degree of logic and distance, and it's not an intuitive influence, and you're an intuitive sign. So perhaps you're being asked to be a bit more dispassionate if people see things differently from you, have different viewpoints. But there could undoubtedly be some cross wires. If you're getting to know someone new for the first time, maybe that's going to be the issue. Maybe someone you've known for a long time and you find it difficult to hear where each other come from. But Mercury retrograde provides so many opportunities to just get much more understanding of how people perceive us, but also how we perceive them. So Leo, for you, the sixth house can be about work, it can be about obligations, responsibilities, duties, can be appointments, can be to do with annual inoculations for pets. The sixth house can be to do with aunts and uncles. Seems a bit of an old-fashioned saying these days, doesn't it? But they're out there. And of course, because it's the run up to Christmas, you may be really keen to make sure that everything around your organisation for the holiday season goes meticulously well and is metronomically efficient. Well, that's a great aspiration to have. What's going to happen if things go slightly awry? You could end up feeling very irritable and feeling a little bit stressed with Mercury retrograde in the sixth house. So the best thing to do, Leo, is actually to let go a little bit. Do what you can to assist everyone to have the best time possible, but don't stress it to the point that actually you're not enjoying it, because all the little details are getting on top of you. But there's no doubt about it, the sixth house can be about the processes of our work. The 10th house, very Capricorn, is how we actually link to the wider world. So it's important not to get so focused on the small details that you lose sight of the big picture. So that would be what I would say for you over the next 10 days. So Virgo, for you, Mercury in the fifth house is playfulness. It's sociability, it's mixing and mingling, it can be romance, it can be having festive fun. But of course it can also mean that arrangements can change at the last moment because Mercury retrogrades in the mix. If there's someone that you're chatting to online, they may seem to be the real deal. 2 days later, they've gone. One of the things that I find about reading about people's experiences with online dating is that however well you connect with someone, because people are still out there, the door is still open to someone else coming along who may live a little nearer, is a bit more in keeping with what they really liked. Whereas when I was younger, you kind of had to work at it with the people you knew in your immediate locality. That all sorts of relationships, you had to work on them. Now people seem to be disposable, and that's really, really hard, isn't it? It's a hard thing about modern life. But I feel that also it's possible that some exciting things can happen that you're not expecting because of the great links with Venus and also Jupiter, and also, of course, the Cazimi, which happens on the 22nd. So I'd be pretty optimistic, but just be aware that things are fluid. But of course, you are a mutable sign. You're not unaware that things don't always go exactly to plan. But you could also use this Mercury retrograde to think about the way you can use your skills and talents through the Capricornian sphere in a more business-like way. So maybe a talent you have, or an interest or a hobby, you could start to monetize it in a new way. And the next 10 days can be a great time to think about exactly how. So Libra, Mercury goes retrograde in your fourth house, home, family, emotion. Mercury in the fourth house is not at its best because the fourth house is about emotion. Mercury likes dispassionate distance. So maybe you're being encouraged through the Mercury retrograde to grapple with something that maybe you don't really want to think about too much, which could be something to do with the emotional or family sphere, or who's going to get together with whom at Christmas time. And, you know, because Pluto has been so bruising for Libran folks for those last 15 years, you probably just think, oh no, not another battlefield of different ways that people are or aren't through the Christmas season. All we can do is make sure that what we do is good. So, you know, obviously Mercury can be to do with distribution in a way. So, you know, make sure that you're getting all your messaging out there, and if there's any cards to send or be delivered, you got your list up to date and all the rest of it. Just keeping your side of the bargain, really. But also Mercury in the fourth house could see you thinking a lot about home changes, whether you want to move altogether, work from home, adapt where you live in some kind of way, all those things. Well, you can work on those in a very positive context. And remember, Venus, your ruler, does remain in a very supported part of your situation. And in that opposition with Jupiter, there could be some surprise money coming your way, even in the next 10 days, or just a sense of enrichment that could surprise you. Scorpio, for you, Mercury in the third house is very Gemini-like. It's quick, swift, flexing, very much to do with those connections with people immediately around you. And that means, of course, that the third house, for its more Gemini guys, is the phone that we all have, or the way that we get around. Now, if you're someone who really likes to cycle, third house, or an e-scooter or whatever they're called, they've become all the go. But seriously, whichever way you want to get around or connect to people, I feel that the chances are that there could be some interesting conversations through this particular event, simply because Venus is in your sign, forging a brilliant link with Jupiter and also with Mercury. And then there's the exact cazimi on the 22nd. So I feel that even if someone does challenge you a little bit, I don't think you're unused to this because of your modern ruler Pluto being in the third house of Capricorn for the last 15 years. Maybe you can make sense. Maybe you're going to have some conversations with people that help you to make sense of some of the changes to your outlook, your mentality, the way you think, which has gone on over the last 15 years. Sagittarius, for you, Mercury retrograde could be about the money. If there is money that's owed to you, particularly if you work for yourself or you are in an arrangement where maybe it's a little bit more laissez-faire, and you know you have to make sure that you're getting your invoices in really promptly. If you're buying or selling anything online, precision's needed around all those areas. You really need to be very much meticulous in those interactions. Mercury in the second house can also see you thinking about how you feel about yourself. And if you don't feel as good about yourself as you might, important to try to reassess that, because Capricorn in energy is the things that you've established over a long period of time. But if you're judging the foundations in your world as being not as good as you would like, because you know you're more ambitious, nothing wrong with that. But that doesn't mean to say that we should downplay the things that we have done, have achieved, the knowledge we have gained. The second house isn't just about cash, it's how we value ourselves. So some rethinking there may be part of the equation for you. But equally, if you have been doing something more entrepreneurial, the fact that Mercury is going to travel back into your sign on the 23rd of December through to the 2nd of January means that if you're doing something different, this Mercury retrograde may show that you haven't quite hit the sweet spot in terms of the formula, and you may have to revisit that and juggle. But stay with it. Don't get disheartened if something doesn't work out before Christmas in the way that you hoped, because by the middle of January things will be much clearer as Mercury returns to Capricorn and then comes out of its post-retrograde shadow on the 21st of January. And that can be a defining time because Pluto shifts that day into Aquarius. So if something does seem elusive in terms of income, keep the faith. By the third week of January, you will have a much clearer understanding of your prospects, but I feel your plan will have evolved and you'll be feeling pretty pleased with yourself, I feel. So Capricorn, Mercury retrograde in your sign means that something that you're wanting to dart forwards with may seem to stall a little bit. I may have told you this joke before, but when the Rolling Stones were preparing to do a world tour when COVID started, Keith Richards said, it was ready, steady, no. Because there used to be a music show when I was a kid in Britain called Ready, Steady, Go. So I thought it was a brilliant joke. He's actually a very funny man. So when you just are wanting to get some traction going for something that's very important to you, it just may feel that you're not really getting it, which could be frustrating. Stay with it. The first house is about our individuality. You still have an amazing link with Jupiter, amazing link to Venus, spellbind people with your personality power. Don't worry too much of those more tangible strands that are often important to you. Don't end up kind of really quite clicking for you in this retrograde. But if you ended up having quite a good time socially, why not? It's just with the Sun and also Mars and that ascendant all in the 12th house. There's something about the energy at the moment which is seeing you not really quite as invigorated as you would like. And that means that where you do want to dart forwards with, even the ideas you've got, you may not have quite the physical grunt and stamina to actually see it through. But all will come right for you on the 22nd of December when the Sun returns to your sign with the winter solstice, merges with Mercury, and then you're going to feel much more invigorated. It is true that Mercury is going to invert back into your 12th house, but in terms of your physical energy, there will be a pickup then. But I think from now until the end of the year, there may be some times when you do need to just have a few hours here and there of just mulling things over a little bit. I don't know if you're a muller over or not. If you see yourself as being much more gregarious and interactive with people, but then you decide to turn the odd invitation down, don't be hard on yourself. It's an in-between time for you just now. Aquarius, Mercury retrograde in the 12th house is a bit tricky. But because the ascendant is in Sagittarius, along with Mars and the Sun and the Moon, that's all very sociable. It's just Mercury in the 12th house means that when you're with people, if you don't really feel that sense of connection, which is very important, or their values don't quite align to you, there could be a potential in the next 10 days for you to be a bit anxious about how people feel about you, maybe even a little bit self-conscious. And Mercury in the 12th house can, I also feel mean at times that we do need some moments of peace. But that's part of being an Aquarius, particularly if you're born in the first decan. Second decan is Mercury ruled. The third is Venusian, so much more interactive and sociable. But if you're in that first 10 days and you find yourself with this Mercury retrograde thinking, well, I'm getting all these nice invitations, but actually I just need to withdraw, nurture myself a little bit, that's absolutely fine. You may find yourself feeling very nostalgic, and some things from your past could come up into your thinking, not necessarily always easy things. So some past hurtful or painful conversations. Also, the 12th house, which Mercury is in, is the more psychological part of life. So maybe your dreams will be informed by some conversations you have, Mercury conversations. So a bit of worry and anxiety can be around, but there's still that glorious set of influences in Sagittarius. I think essentially Mercury retrograde saying just stay away from anyone who tends to be, a bit of a plotter, someone you can't necessarily trust, you don't really know where you stand with them. Those kind of fair weather friends, steer well clear over the next 10 days. So Pisces, Mercury retrograde in the 11th house is very much about our connections to others, our network. And that could be the area that comes under a little bit of pressure. But also it could see you thinking about who you do know in terms of a professional capacity, because of such a lot of energy in the sign of Sagittarius. So that's pushing you to raise your profile. Because Neptune is squaring up to the midpoint, you've got to be clear in how you go about your ideas and visualizing them to anyone in a position of seniority. But certainly dusting down the old address book, if you've got one. I've got one that's so old, and oh my word, look at all those places I used to live and the people I used to know, because time just moves things on as we relocate or change jobs or so forth and so on. So if you have got a trusted old record like that, you may blow the dust off and think, that's interesting, I haven't heard from so and so for a while. I know most people are connected on Facebook these days, but not everyone is. So you could think about who you could get in contact with, but inevitably there could also be some rejigging and changes around some social plans, but particularly where it's a group activity. But because of so much going on in your 10th house of work and business and responsibilities, which obviously very Capricornian, there could be some very important discussions going on around your career or around a property matter that actually, despite the time of year that we're in, are critical to you. And even if many people will want to get to Christmas Eve and have a bit of a rest for a few days, or for some lucky souls even longer, I think for you this is quite a critical phase in your situation, particularly around some big goals and ambitions that you have. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me. All your support means so much, the lovely comments. If you've got any points you want to share, please share them. I try to interact with each one. And your subscriptions and likes are really, really valued. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care, all the best, and goodbye for now.